It started with a text message. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee and scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone, when she noticed a notification from her father, Tom. The message was short and to the point: "We need to talk. Come over tonight." At first, she felt a twinge of panic. Tom rarely reached out unless there was something important on his mind, and his blunt tone only amplified her unease. Her parents, Tom and Carol, had been married for 25 years. They weren't the most romantic couple. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd seen them hold hands or exchange a tender word, but they were solid, like bedrock. Her mother handled the practicalities of their life together, from paying bills to planning family vacations, while her father was the steady, quiet presence who worked long hours and came home to his chair and his newspaper. When Sarah arrived at her parents' house that evening, her father was sitting in the living room, his face unusually tense. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with concern. Tom gestured for her to sit. "There's no easy way to say this," he began, his eyes fixed on a spot on the carpet. "Your mother and we've decided to separate." The words hit her like a slap. "Separate?" she repeated, incredulous. "What do you mean, separate? You've been married for 25 years. You don't just separate." Tom sighed heavily. "I've met someone else," he admitted. "Her name is Emily. I didn't plan for this to happen, but I've fallen in love with her. Your mother and we haven't been happy for a long time. You know that as well as I do." Sarah felt her stomach churn. "You're leaving Mom? For some woman?" Her voice rose with each word, but Tom didn't flinch. "This isn't just some woman," he said defensively. "Emily makes me feel alive again. I deserve to be happy, Sarah. I've spent years putting everyone else first, working to provide for this family, sacrificing my own needs. Now it's my turn to live for myself." Sarah was stunned into silence. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father, the dependable, selfless man she had always admired, was abandoning their family for what? A fling? A midlife crisis? "What about Mom?" she finally managed to ask. "What about everything she's done for you? She's given you her whole life, Dad. Does that mean nothing to you?" Tom's jaw tightened. "This isn't easy for me either," he said. "But your mother and I have grown apart. We've been living like roommates for years. Emily isn't the reason for this. She just made me realize how unhappy I've been." The conversation only grew more heated from there. Sarah accused her father of being selfish, of throwing away his marriage and family for some fleeting fantasy. Tom defended his decision, insisting that he was following his heart and that Sarah would understand one day when she was older. By the time she left the house, Sarah was seething with anger. She drove straight to her apartment and called her younger brother, Matt, who lived in another state. Matt had always been the more laid-back sibling, but even he was shocked by the news. "I can't believe this," he said over the phone. "Dad always seemed so steady. I mean, he wasn't exactly Mr. Romance, but I thought he and Mom were fine." "They weren't fine," Sarah said bitterly. "At least, not according to him. He's been having some kind of existential crisis and decided that blowing up our family is the answer." Matt sighed. "What about Mom? How's she taking it?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I didn't see her tonight. But if Dad thinks she's just going to roll over and accept this, he's in for a rude awakening." Over the next few days, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Her mother was devastated. When Sarah visited her, she found Carol sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cold cup of tea. Her usually meticulous hair was unkempt, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "I don't understand," Carol said in a shaky voice. "How could he do this to us? After everything we've been through together?" Sarah tried to comfort her, but there was only so much she could say. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. Every time she thought about her father with Emily, this younger woman who had somehow charmed him into walking away from his family, her blood boiled. It didn't help that Emily was all over social media, posting photos of herself and Tom with captions like, "True love knows no boundaries and finally found my soulmate." The comments were filled with congratulatory messages from Emily's friends, who clearly had no idea or didn't care that Tom was still married. Sarah wanted to scream every time she saw one of those posts. How could her father be so blind? So selfish? Meanwhile, Tom seemed to be living in a bubble. He moved out of the family home and into a small apartment closer to Emily's. When Sarah confronted him about the way he had left her mother to pick up the pieces, he brushed off her concerns. "Your mother will be fine," he said. "She's stronger than you think. And I'll make sure she's taken care of financially." But money wasn't the issue, and Tom's refusal to see that only made Sarah angrier. Her mother didn't need a check, she needed the man she had devoted her life to, the man who had promised to love and cherish her until death do them part. As the weeks went on, Sarah found herself taking on more and more responsibility for her mother. She helped Carol with household chores, ran errands, and even started handling some of the legal paperwork for the impending divorce. It wasn't fair, but Sarah didn't see any other option. Her brother was too far away to help, and her father was too preoccupied with his new life to care. The situation reached a breaking point one evening when Sarah came across yet another social media post from Emily. This one was a photo of her and Tom at a fancy restaurant, with the caption counting down the days until we say I do. Sarah stared at the screen, her hands shaking with rage. It was bad enough that her father had left their family, but now he was flaunting his new relationship as if he had nothing to be ashamed of. She wanted to scream, to throw her phone across the room, to march over to his apartment and demand that he explain how he could be so callous. But instead, she took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. She knew that confronting him in anger wouldn't solve anything. If she wanted to protect her mother and herself, she needed to be smart. And so, as she sat in the dim light of her living room, Sarah began to formulate a plan. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to let her father get away with this. Not without a fight. The wedding announcement came in the most humiliating way possible. Sarah was scrolling through Instagram one morning, half asleep with a cup of tea in hand, when Emily's post popped up at the top of her feed. The photo showed her father, Tom, and Emily standing on a picturesque beach, their arms wrapped around each other as the sun set behind them. Emily's caption read, "Can't wait to marry my best friend. Save the date July 15th. Sarah's teacup hit the table so hard that the liquid sloshed over the edge. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Not only was her father getting married to a woman who had actively helped destroy her parents' marriage, but neither he nor Emily had bothered to tell her directly. Instead, she had to find out from a public social media post, like she was some distant acquaintance rather than his daughter. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. "You two are perfect for each other." One person gushed. "What a gorgeous couple," wrote another. Sarah wanted to throw her phone across the room. Instead, she took a screenshot and sent it to her brother Matt with a single question: "Did you know about this?" Matt called within minutes. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. "When did Dad decide to get married?" "I don't know," Sarah replied bitterly. "Apparently he and Emily think it's okay to announce it on Instagram before telling his actual family." Matt sighed heavily. "Have you talked to Mom about this?" "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "I don't even know how to bring it up. She's been doing a little better lately, and I don't want to set her back." But Sarah didn't have to bring it up. Carol saw the post herself later that day. When Sarah arrived at her mother's house that evening, she found her sitting at the dining room table, the photo printed out and lying in front of her. "So it's official," Carol said quietly. Her voice was calm, but Sarah could see the pain in her eyes. "He's really moving on. He didn't even have the decency to tell me himself." Sarah sat down across from her mother. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said softly. "You don't deserve this." Carol shook her head. "I don't even know why I'm surprised anymore. He's been so cold, so distant. It's like the man I married doesn't exist anymore." Sarah reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "He might think he's starting over, but we're not going to let him erase us," she said firmly. "We're still a family, even if he's too selfish to see it." But even as she said the words, Sarah couldn't shake the growing anger inside her. This wasn't just about her father's betrayal, it was about the complete lack of respect he had shown for the life he had built with her mother. It was about the smugness of Emily, who acted as though she had rescued Tom from a life of misery, as though Carol hadn't spent decades supporting him, raising his children, and making sacrifices so that he could focus on his career. The final straw came a week later, when Sarah received an invitation to the wedding in the mail. The envelope was addressed to her, but not to her mother. Inside was a glossy card featuring a photo of Tom and Emily smiling on the same beach where their engagement photo had been taken. "Join us as we celebrate the beginning of our new life together," the card read. The date and location were printed in elegant script, followed by a note: "Formal attire required. Please RSVP by June 1st." Sarah's jaw clenched as she read the invitation. There was no mention of her mother, no acknowledgement of the family Tom was leaving behind. It was as though the past 25 years of his life had been wiped clean, replaced by this polished, picture-perfect fantasy he was creating with Emily. She called her father immediately. When he picked up, his voice was cheerful. "Sarah, how are you?" "Are you serious right now?" she demanded. "You sent me a wedding invitation like we're friends from work or something? You couldn't even call to tell me yourself?" There was a pause. "I didn't think it would be a big deal," Tom said finally. "I assumed you'd want to come." "Why would I want to celebrate you marrying the woman you left Mom for?" Sarah shot back. "Do you even hear yourself?" Tom sighed. "Sarah, I know this is hard for you to understand, but Emily and I are happy together. I want you to be part of this new chapter in my life." "I don't want to be part of your new chapter," Sarah snapped. "What about Mom? What about the life you built with her? Do you even care about what this is doing to her?" "I've made my decision," Tom said, his tone growing cold. "I'm sorry if you don't agree with it, but I won't apologize for choosing happiness." Sarah hung up the phone, her hands trembling with rage. She couldn't believe his audacity, acting as though he was the victim, as though everyone else should simply accept his choices and move on. She spent the rest of the evening pacing her apartment, trying to calm herself down. But the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Her father wasn't just hurting her mother, he was rewriting their entire family history, erasing the sacrifices and love that had gone into building their life together. And Emily. Emily wasn't just an innocent bystander. She had actively pursued a married man, knowing full well the damage it would cause. She had flaunted their relationship on social media, basking in the attention while ignoring the pain she was causing. Sarah couldn't let them get away with it. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to sit back and watch as her father and Emily pretended that everything was perfect. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Sarah began to quietly gather information. She scoured Emily's social media accounts, paying close attention to the comments and likes from her friends and family. She reached out to a few mutual acquaintances, asking subtle questions about Emily's past. What she discovered only fueled her determination. Emily had a history of short-lived relationships, several of which had ended under suspicious circumstances. There were rumors of financial trouble, unpaid debts, disputes with former landlords, even a lawsuit from a former employer. Sarah didn't know how much of it was true, but she knew one thing for certain: Emily wasn't the saint she pretended to be. As the wedding day approached, Sarah finalized her plan. She wasn't out for revenge, at least. That's what she told herself. But she wanted her father to see the truth, to understand the consequences of his actions. She wasn't sure if it would work, but she was willing to take the risk. After all, she had nothing left to lose. The wedding day had arrived, but Sarah wasn't filled with excitement. Instead, she woke up with a cold, determined focus. Her plan had been in motion for weeks, and today, everything would come together. She thought about skipping the event entirely. What kind of daughter willingly attended the wedding of her father and the woman who had helped destroy her family? But as the date drew closer, Sarah realized she couldn't let this day pass without doing something. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of their relationship, it was a public rewriting of history, a brazen erasure of everything her mother had sacrificed for her father. Sarah spent the morning going over the final details of her plan. It wasn't vindictive, she told herself. It was about truth. Her father needed to see the full picture, to confront the reality of who Emily was and what their relationship represented. And if that truth disrupted their perfect day, so be it. By noon, Sarah was dressed and ready to go. She wore a simple black dress, not quite formal enough to blend in, but not so casual as to stand out. Her look was intentional, understated, somber, and just slightly inappropriate for a wedding. She wasn't there to celebrate, after all. The venue was a sprawling vineyard on the outskirts of town, chosen for its picturesque views and upscale ambience. When Sarah arrived, she could see the ceremony already in progress. Rows of white chairs had been set up on the lawn, with a floral arch framing the couple as they exchanged vows. She stayed at the back, deliberately avoiding eye contact with anyone she recognized. Her father stood at the front, looking uncharacteristically nervous in his tailored suit. Emily, in her sleek designer gown, was the picture of confidence, her smile dazzling as she recited her vows. Sarah clenched her jaw as she listened. Emily spoke about love, trust, and second chances as if she hadn't built her happiness on the ruins of someone else's marriage. Sarah wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but she held her tongue. There was a time and place for everything, and this wasn't her moment yet. As the ceremony ended and the guests began to move toward the reception area, Sarah followed quietly, keeping to the edges of the crowd. She spotted her father speaking with a group of relatives and felt a pang of anger and sadness. He looked happy, even proud, as if he truly believed he had done nothing wrong. The reception was held in a large, glass-walled banquet hall overlooking the vineyard. Tables were adorned with crisp white linens and extravagant floral arrangements, and a live band played soft jazz in the corner. It was the kind of event designed to impress, and Sarah could tell that Emily had spared no expense. But despite the lavish surroundings, there was an undercurrent of unease in the room. Sarah had been careful to send her anonymous tips to key people in attendance: relatives, friends, even some of the vendors. The tips were subtle, crafted to sow doubt without being overtly malicious: a screenshot of an old article about Emily's lawsuit, a whispered comment about her financial troubles, a carefully worded email hinting at her history of infidelity. She didn't expect everyone to believe her outright, but she knew how rumors worked. Once the seed was planted, it would grow. And judging by the way some of the guests were whispering and glancing at Emily, her plan was already taking effect. Sarah found a seat at one of the tables near the back, where she could observe without drawing too much attention. She wasn't there to cause a scene, at least, not directly. Her goal was to let the truth unfold naturally, to let her father and Emily face the consequences of their actions without her having to lift a finger. As the evening progressed, the whispers grew louder. Sarah overheard snippets of conversations. "Did you hear about that lawsuit? Apparently, she almost bankrupted her last employer. I heard she's been married before. Twice, actually. Someone told me she's still being sued for unpaid rent." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a grim satisfaction. She wasn't proud of what she'd done, but she couldn't deny the sense of justice it brought her. The tension reached its peak during the father-daughter dance, or rather, the lack of one. Traditionally, this moment was reserved for the groom and his daughter, but Sarah had made it clear she wouldn't participate. She'd refused her father's earlier request with a simple, cutting response: "You made your choice, Dad. Now you can live with it." Instead, Emily had planned a first dance with Tom, a move that only drew more attention to Sarah's absence. As the couple swayed awkwardly to a slow song, the whispers grew louder, and Sarah could see the cracks starting to form. It was during the speeches, however, that everything came to a head. One of Emily's friends stood to give a toast, a bubbly blonde who seemed determined to paint the couple as the ultimate love story. "Tom and Emily's relationship is proof that love conquers all," she gushed, raising her glass. "Even when the odds are against you, true love always finds a way." The words were like a spark to dry kindling. One of Tom's sisters, a sharp-tongued woman named Diane, couldn't hold her tongue any longer. "Love conquers all?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean like cheating on your wife of 25 years? That kind of love?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Diane, who seemed unfazed by the attention. She took a sip of her champagne and shrugged. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Emily's face turned red, and Tom looked like he wanted to disappear. He tried to defuse the situation, but the damage was done. Other guests began chiming in, their voices growing louder and more confrontational. "I heard she's only with him for the money. Did you know she's been married twice before? What about that lawsuit? Is that true?" Emily tried to defend herself, but the accusations came too quickly. Tom's attempts to intervene only made things worse, as his defensive tone alienated even his closest friends and family. From her seat at the back of the room, Sarah watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and guilt. She hadn't intended for things to escalate this far, but she couldn't deny that it felt like justice. Her father and Emily had spent months pretending their relationship was perfect, but now the truth was on full display. By the end of the night, the reception was in shambles. Guests left early, vendors whispered among themselves, and the happy couple's carefully crafted image was in tatters. As Sarah walked to her car, she felt a strange sense of closure. She hadn't forgiven her father, and she probably never would, but she felt like she had reclaimed some small piece of her family's dignity. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: her father and Emily's relationship would never be the same after today. The fallout from the wedding reception lingered in the days that followed. Sarah didn't hear from her father immediately, but the silence itself spoke volumes. She imagined him and Emily locked away in their home, licking their wounds and trying to repair the damage that had been done. Sarah wasn't sure if their relationship could survive the exposure of so many uncomfortable truths, but a part of her didn't care. They had built their lives on lies and selfishness. Why should anyone expect them to emerge unscathed? Despite her outward calm, Sarah wrestled with mixed emotions. Watching the wedding unravel had brought a sense of justice, but it also left her feeling hollow. She hadn't anticipated the guilt that followed her actions. Every time she replayed the scene in her mind, the whispers, the accusations, her father's humiliated face, she felt a pang of doubt. Had she gone too far? The first call came from her brother Matt. He had skipped the wedding entirely, unwilling to lend his support to something he so fundamentally disagreed with. Still, he had heard about the reception from their Aunt Diane, who relished sharing every detail of the drama. "Sarah, what the hell happened?" Matt asked, his tone equal parts curiosity and disapproval. Sarah sighed, cradling her phone as she sat on her couch. "People spoke up, that's all. They called out Dad and Emily for what they really are." "Yeah, I heard," Matt said. "Diane said it was brutal. But Sarah, was this your doing?" She hesitated, debating whether to confess. Finally, she admitted, "I might have nudged things along. I didn't force anyone to say anything, but I made sure people knew the truth about Emily." Matt groaned. "You know this is going to blow up, right? Dad's going to blame you for everything." "Let him," Sarah snapped. "He made his choices, and now he has to deal with the consequences." But when the call ended, her confidence wavered. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face her father's wrath or if she even wanted to. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 3 days after the wedding, her father showed up at her apartment unannounced. Sarah opened the door to find him standing there, looking haggard and angry. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past her before she could respond. Sarah closed the door and crossed her arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. "What do you want, Dad?" Tom turned to face her, his eyes hard. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. I know you had something to do with what happened at the wedding." She met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't make anyone say or do anything. I just made sure people knew who they were celebrating." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Tom demanded, his voice rising. "Emily is devastated. Half the guests left early, and the rest spent the night whispering about us. You ruined our wedding." Sarah felt a surge of anger. "No, Dad. You ruined our family. You left Mom for a woman half your age, and you expected everyone to just accept it like it was no big deal. Do you even hear yourself?" Tom's face flushed with frustration. "I'm not going to apologize for finding happiness, Sarah. I've spent too much of my life trying to make everyone else happy. For once, I chose something for myself." "Yeah, at everyone else's expense," Sarah shot back. "You didn't just hurt Mom, you hurt me and Matt, too. You threw away our family like it didn't matter. And now you're surprised that people are upset." Tom hesitated, his anger momentarily giving way to something softer. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. I thought you'd understand eventually." "Well, I don't," she said, her voice trembling, "and I probably never will." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Tom sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know how we got here," he said quietly, I just wanted a chance to start over." Sarah's heart ached at his words, but she refused to let herself soften. "You could have started over without destroying everything behind you, Dad. But you didn't care about the consequences, and now you're paying for them." Tom nodded slowly, as if accepting her judgment. "I guess I can't change how you feel," he said. "But I hope someday you'll understand why I did what I did." Sarah didn't respond, and after a moment, Tom turned and left. The days that followed were quiet, almost unbearably so. Sarah threw herself into her work, avoiding calls from family members who wanted to rehash the drama of the wedding. Her mother, Carol, seemed oddly at peace. When Sarah finally visited her, she found her tending to her garden, humming softly to herself. "How are you holding up, Mom?" Sarah asked as she sat on the porch. Carol smiled faintly. "Better than I expected," she admitted, seeing that wedding fall apart. "It felt like closure, in a way. I spent so long wondering what I did wrong, but now I see it wasn't about me. It was about him." Sarah nodded, grateful for her mother's resilience. "You didn't deserve any of this, Mom. You're better off without him." Carol looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Maybe I am," she said. "But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." Over time, the family began to settle into a new normal. Sarah and Matt grew closer, united by their shared frustration with their father. Carol found new hobbies and reconnected with old friends, slowly rebuilding her life. As for Tom and Emily, their relationship didn't survive the aftermath of the wedding. Rumors about Emily's past continued to circulate, and the strain eventually became too much. Less than a year after their ill-fated wedding, they quietly separated. Sarah heard about the breakup through a mutual acquaintance. She felt a flicker of satisfaction, but also a pang of sadness. She didn't want her father to be miserable, she just wanted him to take responsibility for his actions. In the end, Sarah realized she couldn't control her father's choices, nor could she undo the damage he had caused. But she could control how she responded, how she moved forward. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, she picked up the phone and called him. "Hi, Dad," she said when he answered. "Can we talk?" There was a pause, and then Tom's voice came through, tentative but hopeful. "I'd like that." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a step toward understanding a fragile beginning in the aftermath of so much pain.